Good morning to my students. Thank you all for coming. Morning, Dr. Rosina.
Morning, Dan.
On wait, hold on. All right, it's live on FB already. Okay, a few more people coming in. All right, it's 10 o'clock, so let's just get this thing underway. So, thank you all for coming today to our School of Media and Communications lecture series. This is number 3 for the year. The series of webinars that we are currently set up. This is usually originally a physical event that we normally have, but due to the fact that we have this COVID-19 pandemic happening, everything is going online. Which is both good and a bad thing because our speaker today probably wouldn't have been able to attend today's session if we were running this physically, as she's currently in the United States of America in New York. Without further ado, today we are going to, let me just introduce today's topic and give you guys a little bit of sort of like the etiquette and ground rules of how we're running today's session. So today's title is called Harnessing the Internet in Journalism: Some New Ways to Report the News Online. And this is going to be presented by Miss Mayuri Mei Lin. She is, hold on, let me read out her bio. Mayuri Mei Lin is a journalist with a focus on experimental and inclusive storytelling for underserved audiences. She's reported from the US, Malaysia, Cambodia, and most recently in Indonesia for the BBC, where she produced a lot of visual and data stories for the East Asia region. She is currently studying to earn a master's in digital journalism at NYU, New York University. So that's why she's there right now. So basically, I'm gonna give the floor to Miss Mayuri right now, and the way it's going to run is that she will be bringing a presentation. It's going to be about roughly 40 minutes long. If any of you have any questions, we will have a Q&A session at the end of a presentation. So, but if you feel like you have to ask, if you would like to ask any questions during the session, you can feel free to just type in the chat here in the Zoom meeting, or if you're watching this on Facebook Live, you can type it in the chat on Facebook Live as well. I will then compile all these questions and present it to her at the end of the session today. If you feel like you'd like to ask any questions verbally, you can also do so, but please wait until the end of the session to ask questions in a verbal manner. I will make sure that everybody is given time to sort of speak. Okay, so technically this session is supposed to be running from now 10 o'clock until 11 a.m., but technically we can run a little bit longer as a result. If anybody would, if we have a lot of questions to be fielded by people. So currently the meeting room has like quite a bit of people. We've got almost more than 50 people in the room waiting already. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the session over to Miss Mayuri. Wait, hold on. I've actually not appearing here, but doesn't matter. Okay. So I'd like to hand the session over to Miss Mayuri here to present. So take it away, Miss Mayuri.
Thank you, Ben. Hi, everyone. So just a few caveats. My internet is a bit bad, so if I drop off, please be patient with me. So essentially what I have here are basically just some kind of cool, new, interesting ways we've seen journalism evolve these days. Okay, yeah. And what that entails is usually I've broken them up into these sections. When I was talking to Ben about putting this together, we had the idea of basically, so most of it will be kind of rudimentary, entry-level ways of doing things. And then at the end, I'm going to go through some like really cool examples of more high-techy ways other newsrooms have been doing it. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right in. So the first question a lot of people will be asking is, why even bother including visuals, graphics, animation, anything like that? And it's kind of a layered question. So for one thing, we want to make sure that, especially if you're speaking to someone who is a refugee or someone who trusts you with their story, you want to give their story the respect it deserves. And oftentimes that might mean presenting it in a way that is deserving of the gravity of it, for instance. And I should also mention, as I was putting the slides together, of course, I'm not an expert of all this. So I spoke to a lot of my friends from the BBC, from outside the BBC, and put them together because they're kind of shy. So I haven't included their names in here. That might change later on once I edit the slides. The slides will all be made available to everyone, don't worry. But essentially it is that visual journalism is, especially with everyone's attention span reducing and, you know, TikTok and 15 seconds and stuff like that, visual journalism is kind of really important these days to make sure that you hold the attention of everyone. So first up is about data. I apologize, there are police sirens in the background. It's New York, just ignore. So data journalism is ultimately about adding context. What does that mean? So for instance, if you hear on the news today, there are 72 new cases of COVID-19. Is that, like, assuming that you don't know anything about COVID, is that good, is that bad? You don't necessarily know. So ultimately, it is your responsibility as a journalist to say, oh, yesterday there were 300 new cases, and today there are only 72 cases. So that is adding context. And this applies to all of journalism, actually, just providing the context so that your reader understands the gravity of a certain situation. So I put here, everything looks big when you're up close, but then your job is to kind of like take a step back and give context to your reader. So I spoke to one of my colleagues from the BBC who runs the visual journalism, is one of the people who runs visual journalism around the world. So she has about 40 or so bureaus under her. So the two main things she said about why a lot of people are starting to incorporate a lot of visual journalism is, for one thing, it's to make sure that it helps people care about the story that you're working on. If you say, or the life expectancy of a certain kind of individual who smokes 2 packs a day is reducing, what does that mean? So, excuse me, putting data to that can kind of help enhance your story. But also at the same time, data is kind of like an additional character in your story, right? So if you have two politicians, one guy saying, oh, you know, you haven't been providing education funds in your constituency, and the other guy saying, no, I have been providing educational funds. What you do is you go to the data and you look at the data and say, oh, in the last 5 years, the funding for education in the sector has been going down. So data kind of functions as also a third character in whatever that you're presenting. Okay, so this is one of the stories that I wrote, and it's super, super, super simple. There's nothing fancy about it. I wrote this for the 2018 election. And all I did was I got some data and used Microsoft Excel. So I'm just going to walk you through the process. So first step is I wasn't actually in Malaysia when the press conference happened. And also Malaysia is not very good at having online databases for data. So my friend actually attended the press conference and she sent me pictures of all the data that they were providing. So she sent me the picture. I took the data. I had to manually type it into a computer. And then usually when it comes to data, for me, what helps is that I put it on a graphic. So even if it's just Microsoft Excel, I just make a visualization of it. And here, for instance, we learned that a lot of the voters are under 40 years old. So between 29 and, 21 and 39. So with that in mind, so then, okay, you go back and you're like, all right, so young voters, there's something happening there. And then the next, you do a bit more digging. And then we see that, 3.8 million are unregistered. And most of those people who are unregistered are under the age of 30. So that tells me that there are a lot of young people that they're not planning to vote, for instance. And this, by the way, this story was published before the election, not after. So there are a lot of people who had no intention of voting. What does that mean? So then you do a bit more digging, and this is when you talk to people smarter than yourself. So you talk to researchers and academics and other people who work in the field, and they will tell you that, okay, so most Malaysian youths are very apathetic about the condition of politics at the time. They don't think they can influence government decisions. They think politics is too complicated and stuff like that. So this is how we eventually kind of like formulated the story that came up with the lead that we did. So that's kind of like a simple way of going through it. And these are some databases. So I call them entry-level databases. So very easy, and they usually have very reliable data for you to use. So in this instance, the pictures that you see there is the number of women in parliament. So I've narrowed it down to just Southeast Asia. And then the box on the, let me just move my mouse. So the box that you see here, that whenever you see that, that means that you can download the data in Microsoft Excel format. I'm not going to go into what's the difference between XLS and CSV, but essentially you get a Microsoft Excel document. So again, whenever it comes to data, you want to just visualize it just so you can see. So this is just a Microsoft Excel graph that I made. And immediately you can see, okay, Malaysia's not doing too good. You know, the percentage of women is quite low. So then you would dig in and see what kind of information you can find. So that is kind of like entry level data journalism for you, which is super important. And okay, so illustrations and animations. So when I was at the BBC, we had a chance to work with a really, really talented illustrator. I haven't included his name, but I will later on with a link to his profile and stuff. So this is one of the stories that we produced. It was about how Game of Thrones, the women in Game of Thrones kind of carried the story towards the end. And illustrations and animations, and I'm sure there are some people who are listening right now who are artists that you draw in your pastime. And that does have space in a newsroom, I will say, because there are a lot of important ways that you can use drawings and animations and illustrations in news, in reporting the news as well. So for one thing, if you don't have footage of something that happened, so if you want to describe how COVID-19 affects the body, right? So it affects your lungs, and then you can't breathe, and then you have the coughing. So there are no pictures that can describe that. So drawing an illustration would be like, you can draw the lungs, and then you can show how it affects the lungs and stuff like that. Another important thing for using illustrations is if you have a particularly sensitive issue. So if you have someone who doesn't want their identity revealed, or you have stories about sexual abuse or rape or anything like that, especially children, a lot of children, you're not allowed to draw their faces. So illustrating something that they're describing is a good way to be able to do it and still kind of give the story the nuance that it deserves. So the process usually is, and this is a quote from him, art can be used to transform a written piece and give it importance, which is true, because especially in a space where you don't have the footage to be able to show what you want to show, illustrations can still be able to carry the weight of the story. So in this instance, you'll see here would be like a script. So I just took a screen grab of what a script looks like. So you have one column, which is, and this is in Indonesian because I was in Indonesia when we did this. Like, this is your script, and then this is the visual that you kind of want to go with it. And then you would storyboard, which is this one here. And then you have you would be able to animate. So this was done on Illustrator and Photoshop, if I'm not mistaken. And if you are not an artist like me, I'm not an artist. I was just very lucky to be able to work with some very talented artists. Canva is really good if you want to play around with design, and it's online. And also Vector Creator, so you can create your own vectors and put together some really fun illustrations as well. These are just some work that he's produced in very different contexts. That's Maria Chin, actually, down in the corner here. We did, I'm going to show you guys more from that story. We did a story about female activists in Southeast Asia. Oh, these are the links to the stories. And so I asked him for some advice. So if anyone is an artist, you draw on the side, but you're looking for, you maybe want to become a journalist or enter the newsroom, this is what he said. So he essentially says that keep drawing and post it on your social media. It helps if you draw about something that's newsworthy. So for instance, now it would be COVID, the pandemic, politics is always good. So, kind of experiment and then post it on social media and really build your portfolio in that way, because there is a benefit to showing that you are multidisciplinary within the journalism field. So maps, my favorite. Cartography is also a big thing in the newsroom now, because maps is an easy way for you to be able to show a lot of geographical information in a very short amount of time. So what that means is, so for instance, here you will see a map of Sulawesi in Indonesia. So at the time, there was an earthquake and tsunami that happened. And the context we were trying to provide was that the tsunami had hit the most densely populated area. So it's sometimes, you have instances where, the earthquake hit, but, maybe not so many people died, so the Red Cross won't come, or, aid organizations and stuff like that. So to be able to convey that, hey, there are a lot of people affected by this. So in that instance, I was like, okay, I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. So we went on the map, and it just so happened, so if you see this little red spot here, that is exactly where the tsunami hit, and that also happened to be the most densely populated area. So when we published the map, it really helped people understand that, because it is an earthquake, and Indonesia does get a lot of earthquakes, but this is a big deal because, most of where people live is exactly where the tsunami came. It came right through that little slot in the land there. So this is how you would use a map to be able to convey that kind of information. And this is the map that we ultimately created. And also, this is Flourish. I will include a link to Flourish as well. So this whole thing that you see here, I built it on Flourish, which is free for you to use. And you can make all sorts of like visualization. And for instance, in this instance, it's a slider. So in Google Earth, there is a feature for historical imagery. So you can even like put in the address of your house and then see what it was like 10 years ago and what it's like now. So in this instance, I looked at this spot in West Kalimantan. So it's basically intended to show deforestation in the area. So what better way than to show in 2006, it was all green. And then in 2016, it's all patchy like that. And Squirrely Telling essentially is when you see a story that is kind of full screen. So a lot of newsrooms like to tell stories in this way because it kind of gives it an immersive effect without having to do like AR and VR and all that kind of thing. So this is the story where we featured Maria Chin. It's not just about her. The story is about female activists in Southeast Asia. In East Asia. But we used like a full screen, and then we used really beautiful GIFs that are illustrated through. And yeah, especially with a story that you really want to be able to convey the impact of it, it really helped to really go full screen. So when you're seeing it on your desktop, even when you're seeing it on your phone, it has a very nice effect to it. So if you want a no code option, so that means you don't have to do any coding for it. The BBC, we used to use, shorthand. So this is what the interface looks like. So it is almost like PowerPoint. So you can just like add different sections, and then you can not necessarily animate it, but make it look like it's animated using your scroll. And if I remember correctly, I remember reading that it's free if it's used within like a journalism classroom. So if it ends up being used in one of your classes, it's probably going to be free for your professor. And if you want a code option, this is Glitch. So this is something we just built for one of my classes, but Glitch is free. You can go in and build like entire websites out of it. So if you are a coder or you want to explore that, there are tutorials on the website for you to follow as well. And interactives and games. So all you people who play video games, I've got good news for you. It's going to be useful if you do end up wanting to enter the newsroom, because the game theory is kind of important when you want to build games. And the importance of games in the news context is that you really want to put your reader in the shoes of someone else. So for instance, if you say, oh, I'm trying to think. So one of the examples we have is from ProPublica. They did a story about refugees, and they say that if you are seeking asylum, for instance, you have to wait a very long time. So not everybody just randomly does it for fun. So how do you convey that beyond just text? If you write it, like, okay, I'm going to read it and I'm going to think, okay, yeah, so they wait 7 or they wait 13 days. Not a big deal, right? Only 13 days. But if you put them in those shoes, it really helps to convey the severity of it. So in this instance, what you see is we created a game at the BBC when I was at the BBC for the Indonesian elections. So their elections, they actually had 5 elections on a single day. So that means you have local election, district election, state election, and presidential election, and one more election, which I don't remember. So that means you have like 5 different ballots, and each ballot is a different size, is a different color, it's a different way for you to do it. So we basically create a simulation where you can practice voting before you actually go there. Which, I mean, for somebody, when I first started to vote, I didn't know, like, I was so worried I would puncture the paper in the wrong place and stuff like that. So creating a game kind of helps people really, it's more of a public service as well. It helps people learn how to get it done. So how we made this game was, I'm just going to walk you through the steps. This is kind of a code heavy one, so it's not so simple to make. But first we sketch it out. So you want to figure out what you're trying to teach your reader, right? What do you want them to learn at the end of playing the game that you've built? It has to be newsy, it has to be relevant. And then, of course, you have to script it and draw it. This is, again, the same illustrator I mentioned before. And then you want to design it. So in creating the UX experience so that you have a flow. So what does that mean? That basically means that when it's displayed on a page, where are your buttons? Where do you place it? And if they click here, what page do they jump to? If they click there, what other page do they jump through? So that's what user experience is all about. So usually before somebody builds an app or builds a website, they usually design the UX of it first. So if you put the X button on the left-hand side instead of the right-hand side, will people still know how to work it and stuff like that? So these are some tools that you can use. My favorite is Balsamiq and Figma, because it's very easy for you to be able to learn and pick up. And then there's a link for more as well at the bottom. And lastly, we build it. This is, we also worked with a very talented coder who built it. So that is the complex one, but there are platforms you can use to build a game without much coding experience or no coding experience, I think. So I've never used them, so I don't necessarily endorse them or anything, but there's a link there. So if you're interested in that, you can try that out. And oh yeah, that's just a different GIF. Okay, podcasts. Podcasts are my favorite to experiment with right now, because it is a very Western thing in the sense that, a lot of people here produce a lot of podcasts and listen to a lot of podcasts as well. But in Malaysia, a lot of people still listen to the radio. 76% of people in the peninsula do listen to the radio. Most of them is for songs, to listen to music, but a lot of them, I think something close to 50% listen to it for the news. So in presenting the news, you can do investigations and put it in a podcast. You can do long form stories and features. It doesn't just have to be, oh, okay, in Parliament today, they voted on this bill, and then this thing happened, and then that thing happened, and then the end. There is space for you to be more creative when it comes to podcasts. And the interesting thing about podcasts as well is that because you're listening to it, as this professor says in her quote, it is more intimate because you are imagining the images yourself. Whereas if you're watching a video, somebody's already telling you, oh, this man wearing this white shirt and black pants is walking and stuff like that. So in podcasts, there's just something about it, the fact that it's audio, it really, it's very creative for the listener as well. So there's a lot more connection when it comes to podcasts. So I'm going to play, this is my favorite podcast. I listen to so many, but I always come back to this. It's going to be a bit loud, so I would recommend lowering your volume a little bit. Once we're done, you can pump it back up. So I'm just going to play you a snippet if you've never heard of Serial. It's one of the best podcasts, and it really, I think 2015, but it's still one of the better ones.
This is a global telling prepaid call from
Adnan Sayed,
an inmate at a Maryland correctional facility.
From This American Life and WBEZ Chicago, it's Serial, one story told week by week. I'm Sarah Koenig. For the last year, I've spent every working day.
Oh, okay. I'm just gonna go back this slide. So in this instance, they use things like, so she's basically doing a story about this guy who he himself claims that he's been wrongly convicted of killing his high school girlfriend. So this is, the crime happened in 1999, but this was published in, I want to say 2014, 2015. So he's an adult, he's in jail. So every time she has to interview him, she has to call the jail. And when you call a prison in America, it says, oh, you're placing a collect call to so-and-so jail. Do you accept the charges? So she uses that in the story, which really places you in that position. It really imagines you imagine yourself being there. And then as you listen to it, it's fascinating. It's basically, it's almost like a crime investigation kind of thing. But ultimately, it's an investigative story. She's a journalist and she investigated this story. So at the end of it, once they published this podcast, he was trying to have his case retried again. He was trying to appeal his conviction. And at the end of it, because of the podcast and because it was so popular, he got another conviction. He's still in jail, but I mean, it just shows that for a well-produced piece of journalism that's, accurate and well-researched and stuff like that, it can be very impactful. This one is from This American Life as well. They won a Pulitzer. It's the first Pulitzer ever awarded for an audio piece. I'm going to play it again, so you might want to lower your volume again. And I'm just going to play it and then we'll talk about it.
Darwin's 9, and he's a kid who, I don't know, people just give him stuff. When he met my coworker Aviva, he was playing with a soccer ball somebody gave him, eating a taco somebody else gave him. And Darwin's mom was explaining all this.
Can you just describe what just happened?
I have no idea, she says.
A man, as you're talking about that.
So in this one, you can, basically what you have is an interview. So you have the host, Ira Glass, he's sitting in the studio. So that's the male voice that you hear. And then you hear a female journalist, and then she's speaking to someone who's replying to her in Spanish. And then there's a small boy there as well. So you can hear the bilingual conversation happening there. And because they've woven that in, so it's not just like, oh, and now we're going to hear the story from our journalist on the ground, blah, blah, blah. But they've kind of woven it in. So he's talking, and then he's like, oh, and then she asks him something. And then they pull that in. So there's a lot of way to be creative about this. And the quote I've included here is Ira Glass, the host, he wrote a story about what it felt like to win their first Pulitzer. And essentially is that this is a story, it is about asylum seekers at the border. And he basically says that, stories about people at the border has been written time and time again. Everybody's reported on it. It's nothing new. So technically, if you're in a newsroom, you might get an editor that says, oh, we've wrote a story about that last week. There's no point in going back to it. But revisiting it and putting it in this format and really like telling a story to be able to convey the emotion and the heartache and the just struggle of just waiting at the border really comes through when you listen to this. So I've linked both of these in the slides. I definitely highly recommend you guys go and listen to them. It's just really fascinating storytelling. And if you want some tools, so Audacity is a free audio editing tool that you can download on your computer. And yeah, you can, it's very basic, but you can do your basic audio editing on it if you wanted to give that a try. And Buzzsprout is for podcast hosting. So I have a podcast of my own. So we host it on Buzzsprout, and then it plays on Spotify and stuff like that. So I mean, if you have free time and you want to experiment with creating your own podcast, interviewing your friends and family and telling a story about, I don't know, something that you find unique and interesting, you might as well just give it a try. Nothing's stopping you. Okay, so cool examples. So I'm going to go back and forth. So I have two devices. So I'm just going to look here. But so these are kind of the more high-techy things that I have, but it's really cool. So I'm just going to walk you through. I have a YouTube video. Hopefully it loads. Okay, so this video is from 2016, but I still go back to it every single time because, for one thing, it's an explainer, and explainers are crucially important. I don't think enough people produce explainers. I think more people should be doing it. But so explainers can be, for instance, if you're talking about news and stuff like COVID, there are explainers for that. But in this instance, it is about rap music and rhyming. So it's just one of my favorites. So I'm just going to play it. You might want to lower your volume again. It'll be the last time I tell you to do that.
What I like most about this is that it's not predictable and that it's always changing. So sometimes Notorious B.I.G.'s sentences are long, sometimes they're short.
Like the moment in this verse here.
Said right, if the head right, Biggie there, and I. Papa been smooth since days of under rules. Never lose, never choose to. Bruce Cruz who? Do something to us. Talk, go through us.
Okay, so it's very simple, right? So she wants to talk about rap music and how rappers rhyme their verses. So she goes out, she finds smart people, asks them, and then she comes back and she puts this together. So, I mean, it's basically, if you listen to the whole thing, it basically takes you through her process of finding out. So first, she says she starts with, okay, so when I'm thinking about this topic, I just basically go back to the first most popular rap record, and then I talk to a smart person, and then we just take it from there. So that's kind of like a easy way to do explainers, and it's very compelling and it's very interesting. I highly recommend. I'll put all these links in the slides as well. This one was, I was testing it out earlier. Okay, so this one is a life expectancy calculator. So essentially, the BBC produced a story about trying to predict how long you will live based on data, I want to say from WHO. All this data is available. So what they did was they took all this data and then they basically figured out a way to tell how long you're going to live based on your age and your country. So I tested it. I'm not 35, but let's just put that in. So, and I click show results, and basically it tells you, okay, so a person aged 35 to 39 in Malaysia will live another 42 years. So the benefit of doing it this way is that you're basically providing the audience with customized data, right? It is their age, it is their country, it is their gender, and this helps to really drive home the point. So if you're trying to say, oh, this politician is trying to pass a legislation to reduce the amount of sugar in children's breakfast foods, right? So something like this can help really like drive the point home of why that something like that is important. This is a game by oh gosh, okay, so I was playing it just now. Okay, so it's called The Waiting Game, and essentially is about asylum seekers waiting to be granted entrance, I believe. So it basically, so you get to choose. So these are the characters. So they interviewed a group of people, and then you get to basically be in their shoes, right? So as I was playing the game just now, so they're trying to convey, oh, okay, so this guy, he's in prison and he's waiting. Another day, he's still there. And another day goes by, and today someone's crying. And it goes back to the point where, if you say, oh, asylum seekers have to wait 13 days, 100 days in prison, and you're like, oh, that's fine. 13 days is not even 2 weeks. But someone is crying, it's dark, you can't see, you're starving. So, and then you're in a cramped cell. You don't know, is it day or is it night? You don't know, how are you even counting the days and stuff like that. So these are important nuances that kind of get lost when you're writing just a normal text piece. So putting a game for something like this really helps drive home the importance of knowing something. Okay, this one, let's hope I was testing all these up before. So This is the FT Uber game. It is still one of my favorite games produced by a news organization. And essentially, it kind of tests your ability to become an Uber driver and earn enough money to survive. So in this instance, got it, okay. In this instance, it basically says that, okay, so now you're a full-time Uber driver, you have kids and you have a mortgage. Okay, let's do this. So then you say yes. And then, okay, I'm gonna go easier, of course. So, okay, you start bright and early on Monday morning, blah, blah, blah. So you're waiting for someone, what do? You call him. Oh, what do you say? Oh, take your time, you wanna be nice. So I'm not gonna go through the whole thing. I recommend you do it. I couldn't get it. I couldn't make it to the point where I earned enough money to pay my mortgage and stuff like that, because halfway through your car will break down and then you have to decide, do I fix my car? Do I keep going and stuff like that? But ultimately, the news point it's trying to convey is that rideshare drivers don't get paid enough. So they get taxed by the car company, and it's, you know, there are not enough people taking Ubers, for instance. So there is a news point you're trying to drive, but you do it in kind of a different way. This one is a still infographic. So this is about Brett Kavanaugh. So he was a Supreme Court justice. So essentially here he was being appointed to the highest court, and that's important because if you want to appeal a case or anything like that, once it hits the highest court, if that highest court still says no, you're guilty, that's it. Like there's no other recourse for you. So in this instance, it's important when he was accused, someone of his stature was accused of sexual assault. So Christine Blasey Ford was the lady who was accusing him, and they had to go in front of a Senate. And essentially what this graphic shows us is that it has answer questions, did not answer questions. So essentially the woman, which is this one here, she basically answered all the questions presented to her. And also she was asked a lot more questions. That's what the graphic tells us. The guy, on the other hand, so pink is does not answer questions. So he didn't answer a lot more questions, and also his session was a lot shorter. So you don't necessarily have to tell the reader, oh, he was being evasive. You know, people. So instead of that, you can just put it in a graphic like this and let your readers come to that conclusion themselves. So that is kind of another benefit of putting it in a graphic as well. And this is a really good one. I hope I reloaded it. This is about, let's see. Okay, this is about texting. So this is by the South China Morning Post. It is about how we bend our head when we are texting and how that has an impact on our health. So first it starts out with this really cool GIF, which I see is not fully loading, but it's okay. You'll get the link. You can check it out later. And it has graphics in between. And because it is a health issue, it's kind of hard for you to convey, when you lean your head, it puts pressure on your neck. So, you have images that help sell that point. You also have graphics along the way. And then this one is cool. So you just click here, and then you see the weight increase as you bend your head and as you slouch. So this is just another cool way of doing it. And also, again, it's still newsworthy, but it's presented in a different way. This one, oh gosh, okay. I was testing all these out, guys. So this is about the Thai cave rescue. So this is, I don't remember what, I want to say 2018. There was the football team, the Thai football team. They were all about 12 or 13 years old. They were stuck in a cave. They were stuck there in a week. They were stuck there for a week, and people were trying to rescue them, but the cave had flooded. So I know I was in the newsroom at the time. I was in London for the BBC, and everyone was. We're all journalists, so we're kind of cynical. So we're like, oh my God, they're not going to be able to make it up, but they did. There were a group of expert divers who were able to go in and rescue them. But what we struggled to convey was how difficult that was, because they were like, oh, why don't you just like swim in? And then Elon Musk comes in, like, let's just put a device in and get them out and stuff like that. But it's not so easy. So how do you convey that it's not so easy? So they've done an excellent job. So for one thing, you see the boys were trapped very deep in the cave. So that's quite a distance. And then you have this. So essentially what this shows is this is the size of the cave opening, and this is the height of the average rescuer. So as you scroll, you see different sections of the cave. Like, how do you even fit into something like that? That's so small. And you have to keep in mind that they're diving in on their own, but they're bringing out a boy as they exit, right? So there's two people coming out at one time. So this, and then there's also this. It looks a bit choppy because of my internet, but you also have this. So that's the size where he has to swim through and stuff. So, using this can really convey some of the more nuanced points that's kind of difficult for you to put into text. And no matter how many times you scream it, some people just won't believe you. Okay, this is one that I wrote, I hope. Okay, so it's right at the bottom. Okay. So this one was about that tsunami that I mentioned in Sulawesi. So what had happened was there were 3 events happening at once. There was an earthquake, there was a tsunami, and there was something called liquefaction. Liquefaction is basically because of the waves. I'm not going to be a geologist, I'm not going to explain it, but essentially because of the earthquake and the tsunami, it and the shaking of it, it turns the ground to liquid. So it turned it to mud. It was almost a little bit like quicksand. So we tried to explain like how big of a deal that was, because it is a very remote part of Indonesia. So we really wanted to show like, hey, this is a very big deal. Having all 3 happen at once is very important. So we used a lot of images, of course. There was also text, beautiful satellite maps. This is a GIF of showing the ground turning to mud, essentially. So I think it was satellite images taken on the increment. I don't remember. It was like a time increment, or actually it was 2 images that we just put a fade in between and we turned it into a GIF to really sell the point. Like, oh, you can see all the houses here basically float down in this direction and gathered at the bottom here. So that's kind of a important point. Maps again. And this is, I'm gonna play it again. So this was a graphic. It's starting in the midway point. Okay, let me restart. So this is a graphic to show how many earthquakes Indonesia gets on average, because Indonesia gets a lot of earthquakes. So I think this is in the span of 10 years. This is the amount of earthquakes that Indonesia gets. In comparison, Malaysia definitely don't get anything like that. It's because of the positioning and the tectonic plates and stuff like that. So again, another point that you're trying to convey that you could put in words, but is more telling when you put it in a graphic. Maps, more maps, love maps. I put lots of maps in my stories. Okay, so this is a video that we turned into a GIF of the waves coming in. So, oh gosh, it looks bad even rewatching it, but essentially you could technically put a video in there, but you technically only need about 20 seconds to kind of tell people like, this is what the situation was like. People didn't have time to go inland, that they were away from the wave. So they basically just went up a couple of floors because there wasn't like an early warning system. The early warning system failed. So putting the video there really kind of shows people what they were going through. You have infographics. You also have an animation of what the liquefaction looks like. So when the soil kind of turns to mud and then you see the buildings sink. Again, it's choppy because of my internet, but you can go back and check this out. And then another GIF of the ground turning to mud, essentially. And using GIFs so they load faster. My internet is rubbish, but it's still loading, which is a good sign. I think that's all. So in this story specifically, we basically used images, maps, GIFs. You have the animation and infographics. So we used 5 different formats here in a single story, just to be able to kind of explain the different nuances of it. The next one is, this is the, oh gosh, okay, so I have to reload this as well. I apologize. So Malaysia Kini does incredible interactive work for the Kini News Lab. I definitely recommend you guys go check them out. In this instance, it was about death in custody, which is one of my favorite ones. So they basically, for instance, if you do have somebody who says, don't commit crimes, then you won't be arrested by police. Sometimes it's not really as simple as that. Sometimes you get stopped you forget to renew your road tax and suddenly, things spiral from there. So this is, I'm going to try and click it. Hopefully it works. So basically they have 2 scenarios here that you can go through. And, okay, it's a bit slow. But essentially what this does is it puts you in the shoes of somebody who has been stopped by police, taken into custody, and may have died as a result. Oh, okay. So then you get to choose the scenarios. I'm going to select this. Yeah, so you're traveling in a car, suddenly the cops stop you. What do? You do that. Got it. Oh, you are under arrest. Request a phone call. No. And stuff like that. So you kind of go through it, and it kind of puts you in the shoe of somebody who has been stopped by police and has, death in custody. You get to learn more about it, because talking about it is one thing, but really, understanding the nuances of somebody who ended up in that position is very, very different. Okay, I think I have to scroll up for this as well. So this one is one of my favorites. So it's by The Pudding. They produce really fun visualizations and visual storytelling and stuff. So this one is about pockets. So I actually spoke to the reporter who produced this, and I'll show you the story. So essentially, what it shows is that the size of women's pockets for jeans is so much smaller than for men. And honestly, the way she did it was nothing fancy. She's not a scientist. She's just a journalist who wears jeans. And she just went to a bunch of shops, took a few pairs of jeans from different brands and stuff, went into the dressing room, measured all of them, and then that was her data set, right? So because it is about jeans, no one's going to be like, oh, your data is wrong. So it doesn't have to necessarily be super fancy, whatever you produce, but this is still extremely relevant, because as I was reading, I was like, yes, my phone always sticks out. And then if you keep going, that do talk about the phone as well. So yeah, so then you can see the size of the phone and stuff like that. You can play around with it. So this was an interesting one as well. And the last one I'm going to show you, because I'm running out of time. Okay, this is an animation that we produced. I'm not sure if it's going to load. Okay, so again, the same illustrator that I worked with produced this. And I mostly love it because it has Trump and Kim Jong-un sitting at a table eating cheeseburgers together. Never in a million years will you ever see this scenario. But if you're drawing and you're illustrating, and it does, it's editorially sound, it's nothing slanderous or anything like that. You're just this is an explainer about why they weren't discussing denuclearization. Just gonna mute it. So yeah, so you do have a little bit of creative license, but it does help convey the fact that, these two guys are friendly, and, we've portrayed them as eating cheeseburgers together, but at the same time, they're not talking about denuclearization. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna go back to my presentation. So essentially, these are just some examples. I'm by no means an expert, obviously. A lot of these are from really reputable organizations, and it's just really cool ways of doing it. So I did ask some of my colleagues about advice. So if you are an up-and-coming journalist and you maybe want to be in the newsroom, a lot of them said basically the same thing, is that being multidisciplinary is very important these days. Of course, you need to learn how to write, you need to learn how to edit, you need to learn how to fact check, and all these basic skills. But at the same time, especially now, if you are on social media, make sure you know social media well. Make sure you know how to engage with your audiences on social media. Make sure you know how to produce a good TikTok. Washington Post does so many TikToks and stuff like that. So it helps to have skills outside of that, outside of just writing and stuff like that. And the other person I spoke to also basically said the same thing, that newsrooms nowadays, we're kind of moving towards a journalist working with a designer and a developer to produce some of these stories that I showed you together, instead of, the traditional concept of a journalist just going out and producing is still present, but more and more there's kind of an appetite to be able to move to kind of more creative things. And I'm done. Okay, thank you. So that's the link to the slides. And I'm going to add some of the links that you saw here. And if you ask me any questions and I pull up any more links, I'll just put those in as well. Yeah, I'm good. Ben, over to you.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. Hold on, let me just turn off some stuff. Hold on, let me see. All right. So thank you very much for that. Mayuri, that was a very interesting presentation. I think you did a pretty interesting job. So for those of you who are interested in sort of following up on any of these things that are present here, I will be putting up these links. I'll be sharing this link as part of our Facebook page. So you can always just head on over there to sort of like check out any of the sort of like examples that are presented here. I think it's a very interesting, and it's definitely something that's very, very current and very, very important today, because attention spans from people are so limited these days, and people just don't really want to read. But at the same time, journalists still need to sort of like perform the same jobs that they used to on a regular basis. Just that the medium has to change and adapt to the times as well, because the audiences are changing. And it's still very, very important. And especially today where, fake news and all these other aspects are so difficult to overcome these days, and it's definitely something that in order to sort of survive, that's where this necessary pivot is often required as such. So anybody has any questions so far? I've got no questions so far, but I think I'll just sort of like let it sort of like let everybody sort of ask questions. Anybody have any sort of like questions they'd like to ask in person? You can just sort of like use Zoom's raise hand feature. You can just unmute your mic and then you can start asking questions. Okay, if nobody, actually, I have a very quick question that I can ask Mayuri, basically.
Please.
Okay, so if you were somebody who just sort of like wants to do a lot of these works at a very sort of like individual capacity, you don't necessarily want to become a journalist. What would you think would be the right way to do it? Like, how would you say that a person can sort of like feel the kind of, how would any of this be any use to anybody who doesn't want to sort of enter into journalism as a profession, but just sort of like wants to use it as a way to sort of like supplement their sort of like their regular social media output of sorts? Would there be anything that you would recommend that is easily achievable and wouldn't require too much work, but for somebody who just likes to sort of like engage in some sort of very simple sort of like information dissemination, or just sort of like produce simple works on things that they're interested in?
I think, well, for one thing, you should identify kind of what that is. So do you want to learn how to code? Do you want to learn how to design? So from there, I would say there's a lot that you can do. So for instance, if you're into designing your own website, maybe. Hang on. Okay. Okay, yeah. So if you're interested in designing your own web, for instance, then maybe go in that direction and get some tutorials and stuff like that. But if you want to, especially now with social media, there is a lot of cool designers. Maybe design your own Instagram stories, so you have a brand for your social media output. There are brands that are like, oh, they have a green background and stuff like that. So I would say, especially, there are a lot of tools that I put in the slides. So like there are no coder options for building games and stuff like that. There are also a lot of online courses if you're interested in doing some of that. So yeah, definitely kind of figure out what interests you and then just start small. If you do end up, like, for instance, I'm maybe potentially working on a data story about the Great British Bake Off. What does it take? Which challenges do you need to win to be the ultimate winner? So you could publish that on Medium. You could publish that on your own website. You could publish that as a Twitter thread. There are a lot of options nowadays for you to just self-publish and just for fun. And the Pocket Story, for instance, could have been just for fun, but she fully published it on the Pudding, and it's got thousands of views at this point.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think somebody says they have a question, but I'm still waiting for them to type it out. So hold on. Well, I guess, you showed only one example from Malaysia. So in terms of Malaysian media, how often do they actually engage with all of this sort of like data, new media-based journalism, if you notice? Or what do you think that, if anybody wants to sort of like come into the Malaysian media scene, what are the steps do you think they should like sort of aim for in that sense?
Well, as far as I can see, Malaysia Kini, for instance, does a fantastic job with this. They have the Kini Lab. They do all this kind of really cool stuff. Definitely, I'm plugging them a lot because it's really cool. Idila is really awesome. But in the Malaysian context, there is a lot of demand, for instance, for just like your written story, going out and reporting and stuff like that. And these are still important skills, right? Everything I say today doesn't discount from the fact that to be a good and effective journalist, you still need to know how to write, you still need to know how to interview, you still need to know how to fact check, especially fact checking is very important these days. But in the Malaysian context, I have seen, so for instance, I know Dina Murad from Star does a lot of infographics and long form reporting and stuff like that. So she incorporates a lot of graphics in her piece. And I do believe they work with designers, don't quote me on that. But you slowly see that developing, but at the same time, even if you don't have a job that you can apply for that says visual journalism, visual journalist, for instance, right? just because it isn't spelled out doesn't mean you don't get to do it. When I was I started at Malay Mail Online, and I started just as a normal reporter. And then at one day, I just told my editor, I kind of want to do some data stuff, and I kind of want to do some infographic-y things. So she put me in touch with the graphics designer, and then we just started producing stuff. And then we did kind of explainer videos, monthly videos, and stuff. So, I mean, you don't wait for someone to say, hey, okay, I see you, and I know you're an artist. Can you draw some stuff for me? Always offer, like, build the skills in the background, get a job as a reporter, and then tell your editor, hey, you know, I'm an excellent artist. And I spoke to this lady who doesn't want her face on video. Can I illustrate the story? Can I make a comic strip or something? Not a comic strip. Comic strip's inappropriate, but like an illustration piece or anything like that, you know? So yeah, that's essentially it. Just don't wait for the perfect job to show up. Offer your editor, and that's how you kind of carry the journalism industry forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, we've got a question from Bern. He has
Okay.
raised his hand here on Zoom. He can ask his question right now.
First things first, thank you, Mayuri, for giving us this lecture. And second thing, I wish to apologize. I do not have a microphone plugged into my device, so my audio quality is quite poor. Okay.
It's fine, don't worry. I can hear you well.
Thank you. So the question I wish to ask is a bit of a tangent from what you were going on in your presentation. It's a little bit more involving your experience as a journalist. I mean, how long have you been a journalist, Miss?
Oh gosh, not 6 years, 7 years maybe. I haven't counted in a while.
And most of that was spent overseas, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you see, the thing is, I'm currently in my internship right now, and I'm considering maybe a potential shift in my career scope, because I'm realizing what I'm doing right now may not necessarily be the most suitable field for myself. I do have an interest in journalism, and you can accuse me of being naive and an idealist for liking.
Love idealists. We need more idealists. Don't worry.
Yes, but I mean, so the reason I'm asking this is, how do you really navigate the oftentimes Byzantine nature of the modern media? On one hand, as we've seen with the rise of social media, we have the rise of citizen journalism, correct? And I can quote so many examples, for example, like how people use their social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and then some. And sometimes when they report things to their followers, because these people are influencers, no matter their viewer count, the things they say are biased at times. And on the other hand, we have the established media like Bloomberg, Reuters, The Guardian, and whatnot. And while some of these are credible sources, we can see, for example, with the Bloomberg controversy with the American 2020 elections, where Michael Bloomberg used his media platform to push his own agenda to get himself the presidential electorate. So as in your experience in the field, how does a journalist who wants to maintain his integrity go about it on a global perspective?
Right. Well, for one thing, I don't necessarily think there's such a thing as complete objectivity. I don't think you can approach a topic and portray yourself as completely objective, because we're all human beings, right? For instance, I believe climate change exists. Some people don't. And I don't think that's an area that is up for discussion and is something that, I have to be objective, so I have to interview a scientist who doesn't believe in that. So for one thing, I don't think like complete objectivity exists. But at the same time, if you are thinking of entering it and wanting to maintain integrity, I think whenever you're reporting on something, my approach is always to enter, especially if you're writing a story, just fact check it. Fact check your story upside down, inside out. So even when I'm producing graphics, for instance, I fact check the colors I'm using. I fact check. So if I use orange, for instance, in Malaysia, orange is associated with, I think, Hindraf. That's some time ago. Like, okay, so blue is an UMNO color, for instance. So, you know, is that conveying? So you're using it for the correct political party and stuff like that. So fact check your stories. Be transparent with the people that you interview. Just say, okay, I'm from here. I'm going to be writing my story. My story is about the environment. We're trying to investigate this. And if they say no, okay, I don't want to be interviewed by you, then just leave it at that. For instance, don't try to trick anyone into talking to you. I know that's not something a lot of people do, but I see a lot of TV, and for some reason, everybody assumes that we're all tricksters trying to trick people into speaking to us. But yeah, just as long as you yourself have a certain set of editorial standards that are unwavering, which includes, fact checking, being transparent with the people you speak to, speaking to all sides and speaking to all sources, and making sure that your story is ironclad. And if you do get it wrong, because sometimes we get it wrong, sometimes, it just happens, we're all human beings, being upfront and say, okay, I did my best with the story, but I still got it wrong, and now I'm gonna go back and report and try to get it right. So that's the best you can do. There's no like magic formula.
I will say I do agree with the latter half of that explanation. Your earlier point though raises a further question. And this is going a little bit back, like about 100, 200 years ago, sort of thing. Are you familiar with the term the fourth estate?
Yes.
See, that's the thing. When you said earlier about not being objective, wasn't that the whole point of the establishment of the fourth estate? To basically report on its findings from three other estates, the Lords Temporal, Clergy, and Commons, to the people as a whole. I mean, the media back then was envisioned not to form opinions, simply just to report to people so they know what's going on in their country, with their government, with the people, the world. I mean, isn't that...
Yes, I mean, yes, no, I get what you mean. When I say, not being completely objective, that doesn't mean that just because I have opinions, that doesn't mean that I have to insert my opinion at every juncture.
That's true.
I have a professor who said we can chew gum and walk at the same time. If you are a well-respected journalist, and I believe women should get equal pay, that doesn't negate me from being able to write stories about pay grade. That just means that I am a woman and I have opinions of my own. But I mean, it is something that is not a lot of people talk about it. We do talk about it in my class quite a bit because my professor Jay Rosen, he writes a lot about this. But ultimately, I think we should be able to hold ourselves to the standard of, I am a human being and I will still be able to report on this impartially with balance using my brain. I don't need to portray this image, and I don't mean like, oh, I'm voting for XYZ and this is my political opinions and stuff like that. No, I'm just acknowledging that I'm a human being with feelings and I exist in this world and I have rights, and that sometimes that's just the way I am. I'm a human being, and I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm a robot and I have no feelings and I don't care about anything. Because if you don't care about what you're reporting on, that's almost worse. Because what motivates you to fact check everything that you're writing? What motivates you to go the extra step to find an academic who is been doing this for 20 years as opposed to somebody who's just appeared in front of you and offered their services? So
or creating a graphic.
It is a bit of a...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so it is a nuanced topic, but ultimately it is something that we all have to contend with, and I do believe that a lot of journalists can chew gum and walk at the same time. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. It gives me some things to think about as I try to kind of figure out what I want to do. Thank you for your time.
Please do,
apologies
yeah.
if
No worry.
it sounds a bit confrontational towards the
No.
end.
No worry.
You have to retrospect on that. But again, thank you for your time. And I think somebody else has another question that they'd like answered.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, there is another question. Hold on, let me just put it up here so it's easier for everybody to see. Ooh, I put the text size a little bit too large. Hold on just a sec. Okay, let me just share my screen now. All right, so this is a question from Karen. I believe she's one of my students. Hi,
Okay.
Mayuri, loved your presentation, by the way. This may be a little bit off topic, but would you mind sharing what it's like working as a journalist at the BBC?
Okay, so well, the BBC is a huge organization. A lot of people don't know that the BBC publishes in over 40 different languages. So that's why a lot of the examples you see wasn't even in English. So the thing about working in a huge organization, and I mean huge, they have, so when I was there, I was in Jakarta and I was doing visual journalism for East Asia. So there were 6 bureaus that we would work in very close contact with. So every single day I'm on calls with, with Thailand and with our colleagues in China and stuff like that. And also every day, of course, I'm in touch with my bosses in London. So it is amazing in the sense that I got to work with some of the most creative and intelligent people. And the thing about big organizations like the BBC is they will challenge you to think very creatively, because you'll be like, oh, BBC Brazil produced this really cool thing. And then, so that's like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. I want to try something like that. So it's very creative and it's very it motivates you to do better. But the struggle with a big organization is time zones. I sometimes found myself working all the way up until like 9 or 10 p.m. because that's when London wakes up and stuff like that. But I mean, honestly, the benefit of a big organization, especially one as reputable as the BBC, is that you are in constant contact with talented people. Oh, you have a question about maps? Oh, this guy from Greece is really good at maps. Oh, you have a question about TV? Oh, we have a slew of TV journalists that you can ask your questions to. So it was really cool. It's basically just being surrounded by very intelligent people all the time.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mayuri. I hope that answers your question, Karen. I mean, just a little insight. And I think I just wanted to weigh in a little bit on Bern's question there. That I think, and this is something that I mean, I'm personally somebody that I'm a lecturer that also lectures a bit on like journalism ethics. And being not a journalist myself, but more of a researcher, I have a different approach of going into it. And I think I do agree with Mayuri's comment that that it's virtually impossible to be completely objective in journalism. That is actually a very antiquated view of very classical journalism, that this idea that there is this objective truth, there is objective reality that exists out there, and it is the journalist's job to be able to sort of present that in its most purest form as possible. Because but in reality, as she says, we're all human beings. We all come with our own sets of biases, our contexts, our own different value systems, and it is impossible to say that you can be purely objective without sort of like having any of those elements sort of influence the way they report on things. Now, so all this means is that yes, you cannot get a 100% objective view. Anything, even facts, can be sort of like presented in different ways. They can be framed in different ways, and that changes the way that they are received by people. So the way that you would go about it, and this is what I usually tell, and this also works. This is from the realm of modern day ethnography, digital based ethnography, whereby if you cannot present the objective reality, the way that you want to do that is to essentially indicate very clearly any form of biases, any form of contextual things about yourself that may influence the reporting. It could be something as simple as, say, like Mayuri said, that if you're a woman and you sort of you believe that women believe in sort of like equal pay. And if when you are reporting on this story, by expressing these views, this also then sort of like lets the reader know that, okay, this is the background and the viewpoint that this reporter is going to present the stories on. And then based on how I read the story and also on the background of the reporter, I have a better sense of where this sort of like the reality of the truth is going to be in the middle. So it's really about being transparent. It's about being what is referred to as being reflexive, being explaining in very, very great detail where you are coming from in reporting these stories. And I think that's something that a lot of like journalists are sort of like coming to grasp with it. Western journalists are doing a lot better job with that. Eastern journalists are still playing a little bit of catch up in that regard. But that's something that we're all learning, and especially in these days where politicians especially can easily just sort of like hand wave facts or information that is not in their best interest by saying it's fake, or by saying that it's inaccurate, or it's false reporting, or there's a political agenda at play. And that's where a lot of these things really elevate and is completely necessary to make sort of like journalism especially important to this day. Okay, we've got
Thank you,
another.
Ben. That was far more eloquent than mine.
Well, I'm a lecturer, so have to. That's where that's where all this comes in. Okay, got one more question. We're a little bit over time, so let me just sort of like add this in. So one more question. Let me just pull it up very, very quickly. This is by Dr. Rosina, who is a lecturer here at School of Media and Communication. Okay, let me just. Ooh, this is quite long as well. Hold on. How do I share my screen? All right, here we go. Okay, so from Dr. Surisina, she's asked in chat, interesting presentation. The aspects of journalism has changed vastly since I was a broadcast journalist. Things have moved very fast during the pandemic. What do you think about TV stations that are unable to embrace these changes that you have used?
It is challenging to try and adapt all of these during a long, drawn out breaking news scenario. So as a journalist, typically our breaking news doesn't last, what is it, like 3 months? Usually kind of like the intense period is just for a while. So in that moment, it is extremely challenging to try something new or adapt and then test it out to see if it works. But I think, especially when it comes to legacy media, maybe test things out on social media and then try to adapt that for your TV audiences as well. Because, and some of these things, so for instance, incorporating more data in your reporting, that is doable. And I do believe a lot of the TV stations in Malaysia are already doing it right now. So it is challenging to do it during a pandemic. I would not recommend it, but I know sometimes it's outside of our control. But I would say just try and start small. Definitely, there's no harm in just trying small different tweaks to be able to adapt to some of these. Maybe get you know I worked in a newsroom before. We just asked a bunch of people like, oh, does anybody know how to draw? And somebody would be like, yeah, I kind of draw, anime comics on the side. And then we had him illustrate like a story and stuff like that. So I think the most important thing when it comes to legacy media is just being unafraid to experiment and unafraid to fail. A lot of people are worried that what if I put it out and it doesn't work? What if I put it out and it doesn't get any views? What if I put it out and nobody reads the article? But in every failure, there is something to be learned. So I'll give you an example. So for instance, we produced a story where we were trying to figure out, do people still watch YouTube videos on their phones? Because a lot of people are reading. So we just tested it out. We just put a bunch of videos and it did take time to edit. And ultimately we learned that they don't watch videos, right? But in that, we learned a lot of things. We learned that, oh, okay, they don't watch videos because watching videos on your phone is expensive. It sucks up a lot of data. So then that's kind of why you see a lot of GIFs in my work, because we found out that, oh, the audience doesn't watch videos. Our view count was so low, but the page views was very high. So in every failure or in everything you experiment with, chances are you might fail. Hopefully you don't, but even if you do, just remember that there's always something to be learned from there. And just don't be afraid to experiment. Even during a pandemic, just experiment with small things. Experiment with like an infographic on your social media output. Experiment with maybe like live streaming your TV bulletins on Facebook, see if you get any views there. And then whatever you try, there's definitely something to be learned. And then you can kind of snowball from there, I think. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mayuri. Okay, so we've got we've got a couple of three very interesting questions. Thank you very much for spending your time. For those of you who are very interested, in the content, I will upload Miss Mayuri's slides onto our Facebook page, so you can refer to it. I'll also try to include as many links as I can there, because there were a lot of links, but I believe she gave a nice tiny URL, so I'll probably just end up putting that there for everybody to sort of click on in that regard. So well, I've stopped hearing police sirens already, so I guess that's a good sign. I think I heard like 3 or 4 over the course of your entire presentation.
Yeah.
So,
New York.
Yes, so thank you very much for everybody to attend. Thank you very much to our speaker, Mayuri, for taking the time to give this presentation amidst quarantine and curfew that's taking place in New York right now. So, for everyone else, thank you for spending your morning with us during this. Today is the first day of our relaxed MCO. So, not relaxed, recovery MCO. So today is the day where everything is supposed to be sort of like returning back to normal, restarting our economy and not that. So, kind of the opposite of what's happening in America, essentially. But nonetheless, it was.
Well, we did start reopening a little bit, so
Okay, oh, that's
But
good.
let me just interject and say, if you guys have any like questions, or you just want to keep in touch, I'm on Twitter, and the link to and you can always slide into my DMs. That's the easiest way to keep in touch with me. The link to my Twitter is also in the slides.
Okay, yes, I will make sure all this information is put up on Facebook, your Twitter, your information. I mean, yeah, Twitter will be enough. I'm not sure if you want anything. I mean, any of your social that you want to put on there, I'll put it on there as well. Okay, so thank you very much for everybody for joining today. I know this was a very, very interesting session. And this is probably the last session that we're going to be having for this semester. So for those of you who are gearing up, we're nearing the end of our semester that already started a little bit late, but we're in the home stretch. We're in the last like a month essentially. And so for those of you, thank you very much for attending. I hope you all managed to learn something today. And I also hope that for those of you who are still on the fence with journalism, that this is will give you like a more positive push to maybe pick it up as either your major or your minor in that regard. So thank you very much for everyone today. Thank you again to Mayuri for spending her time with us, and for everybody who's attending today. So this is it. Thank you very much. Have a good day. And for Mayuri, have a good night. Thank you so much. Goodbye.